Hello, this demo deals with the BANanoServer and MySQL Backend. As this code is almost identical to the SQLite Backend database, we will not rehash things we spoke about before. On the configuration file, we need to specify the driver details, server database, username, and password we will use to connect to the database. These details will be used to make a connection to the database. On the main module, we add the Java library needed to connect to MySQL Backend database. This also will need the JSQL B4J library. In the browser module, we have a method called SQLOnBrowser which also uses SQLOnServer to manage payload data, just like we discussed before. SQLOnServer receives the payload to process, opens a connection to the database, processes the payload and returns the result as a JSON string so that this is processed by the browser. Also here, we use the shared ODBC module we discussed in the SQLite tutorial. The OpenSQL sub reads the configuration from the config file, builds up a connection string and then opens a connection from a pool of connections available. Then from this connection pool, the query that is defined via the payload from the browser is executed. The page router we will use is identical with the SQLite router page. We have adding, selecting, updating and deleting functionality. In our PHP-based examples, for MySQL connections we used the BananoMySQL class, we also use it here, but now it has a callback sub to indicate what we will do with the received payload. We just saw the backend database in MySQL. Let us run our application, it's still on port 55056. We open our browser. I see I forgot to change one of the page labels, it still indicates MySQL PHP, we will change that later. Let's perform our CRUD functions to add, update, delete, select records and see the end result. Everything so far is working as expected. Let's open the database and see the records in the database table. Let us update the page label to reflect BananoServer and then run the application again. We will truncate the table so that we can start from scratch. We stop and run the application again. Let's truncate the table so that the counter starts at 1. We add the records to the database like before and continue with other transactions. You might just need to add a progress indicator between the sending and receiving payloads to and from the server. This will help with the perceived speed of the app. For detailed explanations about this functionality, you can watch the video on part 43 as it has more content about this methodology.